Margaret Chen had been the general manager at the Grandview Hotel in downtown Chicago for just under 3 years when she made a decision that would obliterate her career and cost her employer $5.4 million in damages. She was 47 years old, experienced enough to know exactly what she was doing, but apparently convinced that her position of authority made her untouchable. One Saturday night at 11:47 p.m., she received a couple at the front desk, two black professionals with a confirmed reservation, and refused them a room they'd already paid for. What Chen did next, ignoring their documentation, dismissing their proof of payment, and calling security to remove them from the lobby in front of dozens of witnesses, would become undeniable evidence of how racial discrimination in hospitality destroys careers and costs corporations millions. But Margaret Chen's real mistake wasn't the refusal. Her mistake was not knowing that the man standing in front of her desk, holding a reservation confirmation and asking for the room he'd paid for, was Marcus Washington, senior producer for the Travel Channel and one of television's most recognized voices in hospitality criticism. And the woman beside him wasn't just his partner, she was Dr. Keisha Washington, a neurosurgeon with 15 years of experience, credentials that meant nothing to someone who'd already decided they didn't belong. A black couple in their mid-40s, both accomplished professionals, arrived at the Grandview Hotel after a 12-hour drive from Atlanta. They were exhausted, looking forward to one night in a hotel they'd selected specifically for its 4-star rating and customer reviews. They'd paid in full 3 weeks in advance and had confirmation documents in hand. No disturbance, no incident, no violation, just two people trying to check into a hotel they'd already purchased. But Margaret Chen saw them through a lens so distorted by bias that she couldn't process their presence as legitimate guests. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. The Grandview Hotel sits on North Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, a 23-story luxury establishment known for attracting business travelers, convention attendees, and tourists seeking upscale accommodations in the heart of the city. It's the kind of place where guests expect impeccable service, professional staff, and seamless check-in experiences. The lobby features marble flooring, soaring ceilings with contemporary chandeliers, and a grand front desk positioned prominently as the first point of contact. Original artwork lines the walls. Potted plants frame the entryways. Everything about the Grandview communicates exclusivity and refined hospitality. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday in October. The lobby was moderately occupied with guests returning from evening activities, a few stragglers checking in late. The front desk had 3 staff members on duty. The night manager, Patricia Valdez, was assisting another guest. A bellhop stood near the entrance. The lobby possessed that unique quietness that late-night hotels develop people moving with purpose, voices kept low, the kind of atmosphere where every conversation carries weight. It was the sort of moment where everything felt routine and ordinary until one decision transformed it into something else entirely. Marcus Washington had been with the Travel Channel for 19 years. 19 years building a career that transformed him into one of television's most respected voices on hospitality standards, customer service excellence, and the intersection of travel and equity. He'd started as an associate producer, learning the industry from the ground up, understanding hotels from every angle, logistics, operations, guest relations, corporate accountability. Over nearly 2 decades, he'd produced over 300 episodes of hotel reviews, destination guides, and hospitality-focused programming. He'd won 3 Emmy nominations for his work on Travel Standards, a documentary series examining how luxury accommodations serve different demographics. His colleagues called him meticulous. His supervisors called him the producer who never missed a detail about how guests were treated. His reputation in the industry was built on fairness, documentation, and an unflinching eye for discriminatory practices in hospitality. Marcus had graduated from Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism with honors, then completed a specialized program in hospitality management and ethics at Cornell. He'd written articles for Travel and Leisure, consulted with the American Hotel and Lodging Association on diversity standards, and served on the board of the Hospitality Equity Foundation. He'd received the Travel Industry Leadership Award for his work, exposing systemic bias in luxury accommodations. At 44 years old, Marcus Washington was exactly where he'd worked to be. Trusted, respected, and given responsibility for investigating the realities of how American hospitality actually served its guests. He was married to Dr. Keisha Washington, a board-certified neurosurgeon with 15 years of clinical experience. Keisha had trained at Johns Hopkins, completed her fellowship at Mayo Clinic, and established herself as a leading researcher in pediatric neurological disorders. She'd published in peer-reviewed journals, presented at international conferences, and built a private practice that served patients across 3 states. At 43 years old, Keisha was at the peak of her career, accomplished, credentialed, and accustomed to being treated with the professional respect her credentials commanded. That Saturday, Marcus and Keisha were driving back from a medical conference in Atlanta, where Keisha had presented research on pediatric stroke prevention. They'd left the conference early to extend their anniversary weekend. They'd selected the Grandview specifically because of its 4-star rating on multiple travel sites, its excellent reviews mentioning diverse clientele and welcoming service, and its location in downtown Chicago near restaurants they'd wanted to visit. Marcus had made the reservation himself, 3 weeks in advance, using their personal information. The booking confirmation showed a deluxe king room at $289 per night, total of $578 for 2 nights. They'd paid in full at the time of booking non-refundable rate, confirming their commitment to the stay. They arrived at the Grandview at 11:35 p.m., exhausted from driving. Keisha wore dark slacks, a cream-colored blouse, and a tailored blazer. Marcus wore similar professional attire: slacks, a button-down shirt, a light sweater. Both carried overnight bags, both had their driver's licenses and confirmation documents ready. They looked like what they were: accomplished professionals anticipating a restful night at a hotel they'd selected carefully and paid for in advance. They'd done nothing to attract negative attention. They'd been cordial to the bellhop. They'd walked directly to the front desk and smiled at the staff member stationed there. But to one person in that lobby, their presence was a problem, and that person had decided to do something about it. Margaret Chen was 47 years old. She'd been the general manager at the Grandview Hotel for 2 years and 10 months, promoted into the position after 7 years as an assistant manager at a Marriott property in Milwaukee. She was, by all accounts, competent at logistics and operations. Her supervisors described her as detail-oriented and results-focused. But she carried something else with her: a conviction that the Grandview's clientele should reflect a particular demographic, and when that demographic appeared different than expected, she saw a problem rather than a guest. In her 2 years and 10 months as general manager, Margaret Chen had compiled a record that should have triggered immediate intervention from corporate headquarters. 7 formal complaints. 7. 4 of them involved accusations that she'd engaged in discriminatory practices against Black guests, refusing them rooms, suggesting alternative accommodations, or creating obstacles to their stays. 3 additional complaints involved similar patterns with Hispanic and Asian guests, though those had been characterized more vaguely as service inconsistencies. None of the complaints had resulted in sustained disciplinary action. Corporate had conducted what they claimed were thorough investigations, but those investigations had somehow concluded insufficient evidence existed to prove discrimination, despite multiple guests providing detailed accounts of Chen's statements and actions. Training requirements were assigned. Chen attended them, but nothing changed. Chen had a pattern. She responded aggressively to guests who didn't fit her mental image of the Grandview's clientele. A Black family arriving for a 2-week stay had been told their reservation couldn't be located, despite having confirmation numbers. They'd had to call corporate to resolve the issue. A Latina woman traveling alone had been asked invasive questions about her ability to pay. An Asian couple had been directed toward a cheaper hotel chain, supposedly more suited to their needs. Each incident had been documented. Each had resulted in a complaint. Each had been handled internally with vague language about communication breakdowns and coaching conversations. That Saturday evening, Margaret Chen had been in a mood. A staffing shortage meant she was covering the front desk during peak evening hours. She was tired. She was irritable. And when Marcus and Keisha Washington approached the desk at 11:47 p.m., she saw an opportunity to exercise authority in a way that felt justified to her bias. They were Black. They were arriving late. In her mind, something didn't add up. Perhaps they weren't actual guests. Perhaps they were trying to access the hotel for other purposes. Perhaps the reservation wasn't legitimate. She pulled up the booking system. The reservation was there. Clearly there. Confirmation number, names, payment processed, room type selected, no red flags in the system whatsoever. But Margaret Chen had already decided what she saw, and the presence of an actual reservation wasn't going to change her mind. In her experience, that booking system couldn't be completely accurate. In her judgment, something was wrong here. She watched Marcus and Keisha approach. They smiled. They looked exhausted but pleasant. They had their confirmation in hand. And Margaret Chen made a decision. She would tell them they had no available rooms. She would claim the system had made an error, or that the booking had been canceled, or that the reservation wasn't valid. She would create a problem that didn't exist, and in doing so, she would refuse service to guests who'd already paid. Marcus and Keisha reached the front desk at 11:47 p.m. Margaret Chen looked up, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around her eyes. A pause just slightly longer than normal. "I'm sorry. We don't have any rooms available tonight." Marcus held up the confirmation printout, still smiling. "That's not what your website says. We have a reservation. Here's my confirmation." "I apologize, but our records show we're completely booked. There's nothing I can do." Margaret didn't even glance at the confirmation Marcus was holding. She kept her eyes on the computer screen, her fingers positioned on the keyboard as though she was searching for something, though she wasn't actually looking for anything. "That's impossible. We booked this 3 weeks ago. Our confirmation number is right here. I understand your frustration. We've had a system malfunction. Our website was showing availability when it shouldn't have been. I sincerely apologize, but we cannot accommodate you tonight." Keisha stepped forward, her voice professional, but with an edge. "The confirmation says we paid in full. We have your confirmation email. We paid $578 for a deluxe king room. I'm aware. Unfortunately, those bookings have been flagged as invalid due to the system error. This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Margaret Chen had a reservation confirmation in front of her documentary evidence of a legitimate booking. She had payment confirmation in the system. She had no policy that would justify a refusal. But she'd already constructed a narrative in her mind where these guests didn't belong, and every piece of evidence after that was filtered through that initial bias. She wasn't looking at guests who'd paid for a room. She was looking at people she'd decided didn't belong, and she would find or create justification for that decision. "Can we speak to the manager? There has to be a way to resolve this." "I am the manager." "I'm afraid there isn't." Marcus felt Keisha tense beside him. He knew what was happening. He'd watched it unfold dozens of times in his career, the refusal that came without reason, the explanation that didn't hold up, the authority figure convinced of their own justification. But this was different. This wasn't a story he was documenting for a broadcast. This was his anniversary weekend. This was his exhausted wife. This was personal. "Miss Chen, according to your own website, you have rooms available. I can see it on my phone right now. I'm looking at your booking system. It shows availability in your Deluxe King category. I don't appreciate your tone, and I don't appreciate you questioning my authority regarding my own property. It's not your property. You're an employee, and I'm a paying guest who's been refused service without legitimate cause." Margaret's jaw tightened. She stood up from her desk chair, physically elevating herself above the interaction. "I'm going to need you to step away from the desk now." "We're not stepping away. We paid for a room. We're going to get a room, or we're going to escalate this to corporate." A woman standing near the elevator noticed the conversation shifting. She pulled out her phone. A man checking email in the lobby glanced over. The night clerk, Patricia Valdez, who'd been assisting another guest, looked up and started moving toward Margaret's station. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave the property. If you don't comply voluntarily, I'm calling security." "You're telling me you have no rooms, but your website showed availability 5 minutes ago when we arrived. I have the screenshot on my phone. Multiple screenshots. I was about to send them to my travel blog before we realized this was happening." That last phrase, travel blog, changed Margaret's expression not at all. She didn't recognize the name Marcus Washington. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know she was about to become a case study in discriminatory hospitality practices. She just saw what she'd already decided to see. "I don't appreciate your tone. Security will be here in moments. If you don't leave voluntarily, You'll be removed. This is discrimination. This is a business. Now leave. Patricia Valdez was now beside Margaret, her face showing clear concern. She knew Margaret's history. She'd witnessed it before. Margaret, I've handled this. Call security. The lobby had gone quiet. Conversations paused. Phones came out, not just one or two, but 3, 4 people now recording. An older white couple exchanged uncomfortable looks. A young man near the entrance was fully recording on his phone, angled toward the desk. Marcus pulled out his own phone and opened his camera. For the record, you're refusing to honor a prepaid reservation to 2 black guests while your system shows rooms available. We have documentation of this refusal. Your name is Margaret Chen, and you're the general manager. I'm requesting your employee ID number and the name of your district manager for corporate. Get out. Now. We're not leaving without resolution. Either you're going to honor this reservation, or we're going to address this with corporate and with legal counsel. That's fine, because security is here. 2 security personnel in Navy uniforms had arrived, summoned by Margaret's call. They looked uncomfortable, clearly unsure of what they were walking into. One of them, a man named David Torres, had been at the Grandview for 4 years. He recognized Marcus and Keisha immediately, not from the property, but from television. He'd seen Marcus's work. He knew exactly who was standing in this lobby. His face went pale. Margaret, what's the situation? Margaret gestured dismissively. These guests are refusing to leave. Please escort them out. David didn't move. He looked at Marcus, then at Keisha, then back at Margaret. Ma'am, I need to understand what's happening before I can escort anyone from the property. They don't have a reservation. Yes, we do. And we've already explained that to Miss Chen. She's refusing to honor a prepaid booking using discriminatory reasoning. We have it documented on video. Multiple witnesses. Screenshots of your available inventory. And we have her stating her reason for the refusal, which was based on her assessment of us upon arrival. David Torres looked at Margaret Chen. Margaret, do they have a reservation? Margaret hesitated for a fraction of a second. That hesitation meant everything. I explained the system error. Their booking is invalid. I don't believe that's accurate. I'm going to make a call to corporate right now. David pulled out his radio and called the overnight corporate line. When he explained the situation, manager refusing to honor prepaid reservation for guests who appeared to be black, now calling security to remove them, the response came quickly. He was told to stand down, document everything, and connect the corporate duty manager to Margaret immediately. The corporate duty manager, Lisa Rodriguez, a woman who'd been managing crisis calls for the Grandview organization for 12 years, was on the phone with Margaret within 3 minutes. The call lasted 90 seconds. Margaret's face went from red to pale. She hung up the phone and looked at Marcus. Your room is ready. Room 1847. Deluxe King. Check-in is processed. Now we're going to go to your room, and tomorrow morning we're going to speak with corporate. And then, Miss Chen, we're going to discuss this with our legal counsel. David Torres had already called for a supervisor. James Mitchell, the overnight operations director with 18 years at the Grandview, arrived within 4 minutes. He'd been briefed by David on the entire situation. James walked directly to Margaret at the front desk, his expression controlled, but clearly conveying that he understood what had occurred. Margaret, I need your keys. Immediately. I was following protocol. You were discriminating against guests. I've watched your record accumulate complaints. Corporate has documented 7 formal inquiries into your conduct, and tonight you escalated from subtle bias to explicit refusal of service. Your keys. Now. Margaret handed over her keys. Her hands were shaking. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation, but I'm telling you now that this will likely result in termination. James turned to Marcus and Keisha. Dr. and Mr. Washington, on behalf of the Grandview Hotel organization, I sincerely apologize. This is unacceptable. Miss Chen will face immediate disciplinary action. Your room is complimentary for the 2 nights of your stay. Plus, we're offering additional accommodations, dinner at our restaurant tomorrow evening at no charge, spa services, and transportation. But more importantly, I want you to know that what happened tonight violates our core values. You'll be contacted by corporate leadership within the morning to discuss this incident further. Marcus nodded, still processing. He looked at Keisha, who was visibly shaken. We appreciate the gesture. We'll be documenting this incident thoroughly, and we will be pursuing all appropriate legal and professional remedies. That's understood. Again, I'm genuinely sorry. Should hotel managers face automatic termination after denying rooms to guests based on race? Drop your answer below. By 2 a.m. The video had already begun spreading on social media. Marcus had posted it to his professional Twitter account with the caption, "This is Margaret Chen, general manager at the Grandview Hotel in Chicago. Tonight she refused us a room we'd already paid for. When we asked why, this happened. We have 7 prior complaints against her. This needs to stop." By 6 a.m., the post had 20,000 retweets. By noon, it had 200,000. The headlines erupted across media outlets. Travel Channel producer denied hotel room at luxury property in apparent racial discrimination. Video shows hotel manager refusing service to black couple, calling security for paid guests. Margaret Chen, general manager Grandview Hotel, caught on video discriminating against guests. Hospitality executive, expelled after denying room to black couple with confirmed reservation. The Travel Channel issued a statement within hours. "We stand with Marcus Washington and condemn the discriminatory treatment he and his wife experienced. This incident represents exactly the kind of bias we've dedicated our platform to exposing." The Grandview Hotel issued a more defensive statement. "We take all guest concerns seriously. We are conducting a thorough investigation and have taken immediate action with the staff member involved." Civil rights organizations amplified the story. The NAACP called for investigation. The American Civil Liberties Union issued a statement. Hospitality industry leaders publicly condemned the incident. Margaret Chen was fired by the Grandview on Tuesday, 48 hours after the incident. The termination letter was thorough. "Due to your actions on October 15th, during which you refused service to paying guests based on race, discriminated against them in violation of federal civil rights law, and called security to forcibly remove them from the property. Your employment with the Grandview Hotel is hereby terminated immediately." Your record contains 7 formal complaints spanning your tenure, with 4 specifically documenting allegations of racial discrimination. Despite counseling and training, your conduct has continued and escalated. Your final paycheck will be processed within 10 business days. Your name will be forwarded to the hotel industry's central complaint database. But termination wasn't the only consequence. Marcus and Keisha contacted civil rights attorney Jennifer Park within 24 hours of returning to their home in Atlanta. The lawsuit, filed 30 days later, named Margaret Chen personally. The Grandview Hotel, Grandview's parent corporation Prestige Hospitality Solutions, and the property's owner. The claims were extensive and damaging. Asterisk, violation of Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Asterisk, intentional discrimination based on race. Asterisk, breach of contract, refusing to honor paid booking. Asterisk, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Asterisk, negligent supervision and failure to prevent discrimination despite 7 prior complaints. Asterisk, violation of the Fair Housing Act. Asterisk, punitive damages for willful discrimination. Asterisk, lost business opportunities. Marcus had scheduled filming at 5 other Prestige properties that were now canceled. Asterisk, emotional trauma and dignity harm. The complaint documented not just the October 15th incident, but also Margaret Chen's complete personnel file. The 7 complaints, the vague resolutions, the training that had never produced behavioral change, the corporate inaction despite clear documentation of a pattern. Prestige Hospitality's legal team reviewed the evidence. Corporate counsel reached out to the company's insurance carrier. Everyone reached the same conclusion. Indefensible. The video was too clear. The witnesses were too numerous. The pattern was too well documented. Marcus Washington was too credible and too public. Continued litigation would only expand the damage. Prestige Hospitality settled the case within 14 months. $5.4 million paid to Marcus and Keisha Washington. The settlement included terms that the Grandview Hotel implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff, establish a third-party oversight board to review complaints, and implement a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory refusals of service. Margaret Chen's name was entered into the hotel industry's centralized complaint database, permanently marking her as having been terminated for discrimination. At 47 years old, her career in hospitality management was over. Marcus Washington testified before the Chicago City Council's Human Rights Committee 3 months after the settlement. The chamber was full. Media representatives lined the back. Civil rights advocates filled the gallery. Marcus spoke slowly, choosing his words with the precision of someone accustomed to public communication but emotionally affected by what he was recounting. I am Marcus Washington. I've worked in hospitality journalism for 19 years. I've reviewed hundreds of hotels, interviewed thousands of guests, and documented the reality of how American hospitality serves different demographics. I'm also the man who was denied a room at the Grandview Hotel on October 15th, despite having paid for it in advance. He paused, gathering himself. When we arrived at the Grandview that night, we had a confirmation. We had proof of payment. We had every document required to check in. Margaret Chen looked at us and decided we didn't belong there. She didn't know us. She didn't know our credentials. She made an assessment in seconds and then constructed a false narrative to justify that assessment. Another pause. His voice strengthened. The most troubling part isn't the incident itself. It's that this wasn't her first time. Margaret Chen had 7 formal complaints over 2 years and 10 months. 7. 4 of them were specifically about discrimination against black guests. Corporate investigated, corporate trained her, corporate did nothing meaningful. So she did it again. She refused a room to another black couple because the system that was supposed to prevent this had failed. He looked directly at the council members. If this can happen to me, a nationally known figure in hospitality criticism with resources and credibility, what happens to families traveling without that platform? What happens to people who don't have legal counsel ready? What happens to people who just want to rest after traveling and are told they don't belong? His voice carried controlled anger now, the kind that comes from principle rather than emotion. This case cost the Grandview Hotel $5.4 million. It ended Margaret Chen's career. Those are consequences. But money doesn't undo the humiliation of being told you're not good enough to stay at a hotel you've already paid for. It doesn't restore the dignity of having security called on you for existing while black. And it doesn't change anything if the system that allowed Margaret Chen to accumulate 7 complaints before being fired stays exactly the same. He paused one final time. The settlement requires training and oversight. That's accountability. But we need more. We need hotels to understand that discrimination isn't a training issue. It's a values issue. And if those values aren't present, no amount of training will create them. The room was silent. This wasn't about one manager or one night or one incident. This was about a corporation that received 7 documented complaints about one employee's discriminatory practices and responded by assigning training instead of termination. This was about a system that validated assumptions until someone with resources and credibility fought back. Prestige Hospitality's investigation of Margaret Chen revealed a troubling pattern of inaction. When the first complaint was filed, a black family in 2022 claiming they'd been told their reservation wasn't valid, corporate labeled it a communication error. When the second complaint came in, corporate said there wasn't sufficient evidence. When the third complaint arrived, corporate initiated mandatory training. And then they waited to see what Chen would do next. By the time the 7th complaint was filed, the pattern was unmistakable. But corporate had let 6 opportunities pass to prevent the 7th incident, 6 warnings, 6 documented instances, and corporate had done nothing meaningful with any of them. Should corporations face automatic investigation after 3 complaints about the same employee for discrimination? Drop your answer below. The real question is, what changes now? Do hotels finally remove managers after 3 discrimination complaints instead of 7? Do corporations finally acknowledge that patterns in complaint history matter more than any individual incident? Do we finally recognize that the problem isn't one bad employee, it's systems that protect those employees until they target someone with enough power to fight back? Because if we don't fix the systems at Prestige Hospitality that allowed Margaret Chen to accumulate 7 complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught corporate leadership to treat discrimination complaints as training opportunities rather than termination triggers, then we're just waiting for the next manager, the next refusal, the next family humiliated at a front desk, the next viral video. Comment if you believe this should be law. Hotels that refuse service to guests with valid reservations based on protected characteristics should face automatic investigation by state attorneys general. And corporations should be required to terminate any manager with 3 or more substantiated discrimination complaints. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button because we're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for every family that deserves to check into a hotel without being assessed for their worth. For every traveler who shouldn't have to advocate for themselves just to access what they've already paid for. For every person who deserves to belong in public spaces. This isn't just about one manager or one corporation. It's about all of us and the world we're willing to accept. When bias shows up at the front desk of a hotel, when discrimination hides behind false system errors and invented policies, when corporations respond to complaints with training instead of termination, we're all diminished. We all lose. The question is, how many times are we going to watch this pattern repeat before we demand that it stops?